Despite what amounts to apparently the longest city council meeting in city history, despite widespread opposition from many different sectors of the community, 14 hours of testimony, the Atlanta City Council has taken another big step forward in approving what has come to be known as Cop City. They've agreed to allocate $30 million towards development of the $90 million 85-acre facility where police, firefighters, and emergency responders would train. It was an 11-4 vote around 5:30 a.m. local time. Almost everyone who spoke, and there were many people who spoke, were against it. What they were doing is participating in what they thought was democracy, but the joke, I guess, was on them and us, because we live in America, unfortunately, and that's not how things work. So, unfortunately, the will of the people was not respected by the city council there. We had a lot of people incredibly frustrated by that. Reverend Kiana Jones, activist and city resident, said that opponents showed up because we want you to know that we are not letting this go. This is not the end, because we have a duty to stand against injustice in all of its forms. And if you're not familiar with the story, and I think there's a good chance you are, it's been a big story for literally months now. The opposition to this massive police and first responder training ground comes in a number of different forms. Many people are worried about this being another massive step forward in militarization of the police. Some locals who live right around where it is being built are already concerned about the constant helicopters and troop carriers. And basically, it seems like they live in the green belt in Iraq, as well as concerns over the environmental damage that'll be done. We'll be talking more about that. And the violence from police that has already resulted in one activist being killed. So, Dan, this is an unfortunate update. What do you make of it?
Very unfortunate. I love the irony that I think this was called, I had to write it down because it's so dystopian. The real name for it is the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center. And they were trying to do some stuff about, restorative justice and all these other different buzzwords that tried to help. But this is what happens when you get the slightly less conservative response, or the Democratic Party response to everything that was happening just 3 years ago today, actually, with the Black Lives Matter protests relating to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Too many names for me to say without getting choked up on air right now. But the calls from that, a lot of people said the calls to defund the police were strong and radical, but what was really beneath those were to reallocate police resources to other aspects of society that will prevent crime. People complain about danger on, metro systems or subways or things like that. People complain about people who are unhoused on the streets. Well, if the cops weren't getting, the majority of major city budgets, and the cops weren't getting these major projects, I'd love to see Atlanta spend $90 million to build, a campus of housing somewhere in the forest, right? There's so many other things that could be better done with that money. And like you were saying earlier, John, the fact that you had supposed democracy, people who came out to protest and stand against this Cop City thing, saying, no, we don't want this to be the environmental disaster it's going to be, or the ultimate cop training disaster. I know they hear me, that it's going to be. But but the fact that the supposedly progressive city of Atlanta, black people always call it Wakanda in America. Supposedly this is the city where black people have things under control. You see it time and time again, mayors are on the side of giving the cops more money. Even these mayors elected by black people in a majority black city. So it just goes to show even the Democratic Party option for restorative justice, or thinking past this really broken criminal justice system that we have right now, is woefully inadequate. And worst of all, they're not even listening.
Yeah, no, not at all. Well, I mean, I guess they technically, maybe they listened.
They considered it
here, for 14 hours. They were there, their ears were present, but were they truly listening? Perhaps not. Yeah, you brought up some great possibilities for how that money could be spent. One way that they could spend it in this sort of facility, doing something like what they say they're gonna do, is, what if it wasn't constant drills on how you kick down a door and throw a flashbang in? What if it was, okay, here's a crazy situation that you just might come across in your job. Someone is experiencing a little bit of chaos in their home and they're calling you. Now, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna show up and help? Are you gonna murder the person who called you? Which are you gonna do? That's a fun little simulation that they could run through. Here's a person that's having a little bit of a mental health crisis. Let's see if you can get through this incident without murdering them. Those would be good bits of training that they could do. Integrating some of the philosophy of defund the police, like having police work alongside mental health experts to figure out how do you distribute responsibilities and authority for different sorts of incidents. That would be sort of next level training that I think is sorely needed. I have a feeling this is going to be how you quickly run out of your troop carrier, how you take the massive sniper rifle off the back, how you blow the grenade through the door. That's what it seems like the training is gonna be more focused on.
The last thing on that is that you can see the reaction to there's Manuel Tortuguita, the activist who was killed protesting Cop City right there. They said that he was firing at the police officers. The autopsy found that he was sitting cross-legged and had bullet holes through his legs. Not to get all graphic, but like just look at the microcosm of how they treated a protester for this thing. And realize that it's to train cops to basically do that same thing with protesters, to misinform the press, to misinform the next of kin, and to cover their tracks for the mistakes they're making. I would love to see some better policing, but it's not gonna start at Cop City.
And I'm really glad that you brought that up because really, I just want to address a couple of the concerns that people in the community have. So the people who are worried about their area now being ruined because it's right there, there's nothing that they're gonna do for those people. So feel really bad for those people, their life, their experience of their life, their property value. I don't know what's gonna be done with that. On the environmental stuff, they say they've taken concerns around the environment seriously. They say that they're not gonna have to cut down acres of trees because the targeted parcel of land is already cleared. And those trees that exist are invasive species. Well, first of all, I don't know that I necessarily trust you to decide what percentage are invasive species and whether invasive species have some sort of right to be there, but that's what they're saying. They also say that any hardwood tree destroyed in construction will be replaced with 100 new ones. Okay, that's a fine pledge to make. Case could be made that a multi-century old hardwood tree being replaced by a brand new one or even 100 brand new ones is not exactly the same thing. It's one thing to plant trees, it's another thing to maintain them so they actually grow to maturity. A lot of those projects that plant trees don't necessarily steward them afterward. And in many cases where those have been checked years later, there's no trees there. So still concerns about that. But interestingly, so the environmental stuff, they seem to be taking more seriously than the militarization stuff. Because if I was concerned about this, as I am, I would be very concerned to find out, as was reported by Kenny Clips himself, Ken Klippenstein, that a recent intel report by the Department of Homeland Security about some of the protesters appears to have cribbed language directly from Andy Ngo. You can see, and he's got an article up on The Intercept, by the way, where you can get more details on this. References to violent far left militants, basically, is almost word for word right out of an Andy Ngo thing. Andy Ngo, of course, is a guy who I think technically he identifies as a journalist, but clearly his job is doing PR for violent fascist thugs. So it looks like they're big readers of Andy Ngo, which is very concerning if you're worried about where the police are going. Anyway, any final thoughts?
I love the contrast of Andy Ngo, milkshake face as I like to call him, describing 5 militants as part of a far left violent occupation. And then you look at Roy Wood Jr.'s great piece from The Daily Show, and he's talking to the people there, and they don't want to be recognized, but they're talking about, we have prayer circles over here, and then we're going to borderline sing Kumbaya over there, and then we're gonna do like these are not violent people. So I'm not encouraged that we're just gonna be making a city for more of not just policing and what they do, but the culture of policing, which is lying about left-wing movements.
100%. Yeah, if they were violent people, then Marjorie Greene would be advocating for their interests, and she's not. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.